So you are a clinical psychologist. You've been working for more than 30 years with children and families. Obviously, you've got a passion for this. What made you get into this? What made you get started?
Well, yeah, I do have a passion for it. And once I realized that I loved babies and toddlers, and I had 3, but I didn't want to go on to having 10, which could have been easily me because
Oh,
it
no.
was so fun. I decided to specialize in early development, infant and toddler development. So
Mhm.
that even increased my passion. And that was over 25 years ago. And that's when I started to study the body. Because when you're talking about early development, all you have is the body. And I learned about the work of the autonomic nervous system, one of our nervous systems, through someone who became a friend of mine, Dr. Stephen Porges, who has developed the polyvagal theory. So
Mm.
I integrated the body into my practice. And for about a couple decades, and then became pretty aware that our education system and even my field of mental health was still very top down, was
Mhm.
still very, judgmental and shaming of parents and even of children who had challenging behaviors. So I decided to start to document that. And I started a blog, and I wrote a book called Beyond Behaviors um, that talked about the role of the body and also the difference between a stress response and a purposeful misbehavior. And your book, your amazing book, came out in 2019. Mine did as well. And you talked about a stress response. And this is coming from people who are in body mind, right?
Mhm.
It's so revolutionary. And that's my passion. That's what gets me up in the morning. And I'm also kind of
Well, I'm
hoping,
with you. Oh my God, right there.
oh my gosh, right? Isn't it? It's almost everything, I think, understanding the bigger picture.
Yeah, yeah, the whole body. I mean, we have this conception that we're just gonna, and this is what our culture tells us, like everything is just a choice, and it's all this like kind of top-down thing, and it's kind of the way our culture has been for hundreds of years, but it's
Yeah.
not. There's so much to understand about the biology, the nervous system, and I love that your book approaches it and teaches parents about the kids' nervous system and our own nervous system. I mean, because this is so, so vital.
Well, it's so, so vital. And, you know, I honestly wish there wasn't a need for that book that I wrote, because in there I have dozens of stories about children, and like you said, like a microcosm of our culture is the education system. And the
Mhm.
children in my practice that I knew were having stress behaviors due to their body's interpretation of the world around them, including the adults, um, was not due to purposeful misbehavior, but then they were being treated with these expensive um, plans that involve timeouts and ignoring them. And those things that we know stress the nervous system even more. So,
So I want to go back to basics here for the
yeah,
listener. So
good. Yeah,
that, you talked about this top-down judgmental shaming approach, and you talked about how, in your first book, you talk about kind of going beyond behaviors. And I love that idea, talking about how the idea that, I mean, to me, as I started to understand this in a very simple way, was like, oh yeah, our kids' nervous system, fight, flight, or freeze, is like that's like pretty much that's like the fully developed system when they're born, right? Because that's the most vital, keep you alive system. And so fight, flight, or freeze, like those are a bunch of behaviors that happen from a nervous system response. And is this what you're talking about? This idea that moving beyond this idea of misbehavior and looking at what is underneath this behavior? Because I think that a lot of us, this is still filtering in. Like we're not totally there yet as far as like fully accepting this idea. So tell me a little bit more about that basic piece.
yeah. So unbelievably, it has not filtered in yet into our general culture. And I'm excited about depositing it into the parenting world with a hefty amount of science, only because that's how I think that's how you get acceptance. It's like, no, this isn't just a feel good idea. This isn't about permissive parenting. This isn't about just being gentle or letting your child do what they want. This is so much more than that. This is about finally understanding that nervous systems matter. And I think the piece that is just giving me so much energy around this is that it's not just about the autonomics, like the fight or flee or freeze, but the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett, who's a very popular. Her work is taking off like lightning. It segs into this and it adds another dimension. So I am so excited about this time, and I also just honor, like, you found this journey through seeing how well it works. And I found this journey through seeing how once we do this, it worked with hundreds and almost thousands of patients that I've seen over the past 30 years. So as much as I loved my private practice, I had to start writing because I really wanted to filter into our general culture more.
That's so awesome. And Mona's mentioning Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. She was on episode 267, dear listener. Amazing episode. So make sure you go back and listen to it. But what you're saying, so, and you open your book with a story of a parent who's she's a teacher of young kids, right? So she knows about how to deal with kids, and she's totally frustrated with her child, and she's using some of the tools she knows from her classroom. She's using the sticker reward chart. She's, trying to distract her child. There's a big meltdown. And maybe we can apply this idea of like the what's happening in the child's nervous system to the behavior kind of with that example.
Yeah, great. And just an incredible, first of all, I know you're in this boat of no blame, no shame. This is no blame, no shame. This was an amazing mom, a teacher, a well-organized classroom. And so she just used all her skills to help her child prevent a tantrum, and it didn't. So the way we can think about it, I think, is asking ourselves in the moment a simple question. And that is this a top-down, motivated, intentional, purposeful behavior, or is this a bottom-up or a body-up behavior? We know that these automatic, very fast behaviors, like they were at Target, and all of a sudden he got into such a state that he chucked the candy bar and it hit the cashier in the face. It was horrible for everyone involved, right? Everyone was humiliated. But let's think about this. We don't really distinguish body up from top down behaviors. So, that's one thing we can do right away. We can think about, is the body precipitating this behavior because it is suddenly in the sympathetic nervous system, or what I call the red pathway? The child or the adult, we don't choose that pathway. Mm-hmm. The body chooses it for us. It's a protective pathway, even though the results can be horrible. So I try to help parents understand that, first of all, let's figure out where our body is, if we are sturdy enough, if we are present enough, if we're not so triggered or activated ourselves, because those behaviors, like when your child injures someone, that can cause us so much shame and trigger ourselves. Mm-hmm. So it's really a way of looking at behaviors through this holistic brain-body lens and starting to find so much more self-compassion for myself as a parent, and also for my child, and less blame, because we understand the etiology. I talk about behaviors as the tip of the iceberg. That's just a little tip, but what's underneath is where we get our true answers.
Okay, so you're looking at this situation with this parent and saying, it looks like this chucking of the candy bar was something that probably was motivated by the body, right? The child's feeling threatened, the stress response is being activated, the child's motivated. How do parents tell in a moment like that? Like you're saying, like, ask this question. A lot of us are we're in a culture that, you know, that assumes that kids are manipulating parents, like, and assumes that, like, we have a lot of like power struggles in our culture, right? Like, as
Yes.
far as like who's in control and whatnot, right? And so it can be, I imagine it's going to be really hard for a lot of parents to be able to tell, you know, is this something, a top down thing my child's choosing versus is it like a body motivated behavior?
Yeah, yeah. And the way we know the difference is through something called biomarkers. And all biomarkers are the things we observe on our child's body. It'll tell us the difference between a motivated behavior that is, you know, thoughtfully thought out, might be limit testing, which children do when we want them to, because that's part of growing up, right? And a stress response, a stress behavior, which is not motivated, it is instinctual.
Mhm.
So here's how you know the difference. A stress, well, they're long lists, and I describe it in a whole chapter in the book. But here's some basic
Mhm.
biomarkers. Um, when you are in an activated red pathway, risk, you know, fight or flight, you will have the action will be very quick. It will be, it could happen very fast, right? It
Mhm.
guess seems like 1 minute your child is okay, the next minute they're checking a candy bar at the cashier. You also have different other physiological signs. The child might have sweat on their nose. Their heart rate may be going faster, or it may be
Mhm.
irregular. They maybe have sweaty palms. Their the look on their face actually changes. The vagal nerve innervates different muscles in the face. So you might see eyes that are wide open or darting around. Um, you will
Mhm.
see the upper face looks kind of activated. There may be growling or screaming or yelling or
Mhm.
animal sounds. You know, all these different things that we can see on the body, including the last one I'll mention is the rate and rhythm of movement. So those behaviors that have a high movement, you know, like running away,
Mhm.
hitting,
Mhm.
spitting, kicking, those behaviors that are so hard for us as parents,
Mhm.
those are typically through our biomarkers, we can consider those stress behaviors and not motivated behaviors. And then, do you want
Yeah.
me to give you an example of the other kind or not?
Yeah, yeah, that'd be great because I'm trying to imagine like a kind of a top-down motivated behavior. I can imagine, I can picture like a young child like looking at me straight in the eye and taking that cup and going, you know, and just dumping it over. Like that would be like that one I would interpret as like you have chosen this child.
Right on. Exactly. Exactly. That would be a perfect example of a toddler behavior, right? Or
Mhm.
if, or later, you know,
Yeah.
there's thoughtfulness, you're grading your movements. This is a scientist. This is a little scientist going, I'm going to experiment here. I'm going to see what kind of a reaction there's going to be, and I'm going to do it on purpose. So
Mm.
Hunter, that's a perfect example. And that could have been this little guy, you know, the next day because he was 4. So, you know, that is a very good example. In an older child, it might look like, so you've put the iPad away for the night, and they know the cupboard it's in, and they know you fell asleep. So your middle schooler may go and find that iPad and sneak it out and play video games because they know you're asleep. That's a very good testing behavior, very expected. And of course, we would have different consequences for that than if a child was suddenly on the couch and they get a shaming message on their IG feed, and all of a sudden they throw the iPad across the room because their nervous system has just detected threat.
Okay, yeah, and this is so fascinating. I mean, and this is what you're teaching is so beautiful because I mean, this is like what I'm teaching to parents, right? Is that like when we have these quick responses, when we're losing it, we're yelling or we're you know swatting at our kids. Uh, these are a lot of this is not something we would choose. It's not something we would consciously choose. It's our nervous system, and it's not something that we should be blaming and shaming ourselves for, but we do have to kind of take responsibility for, right? Like these are our actions, but it's not like anyone chose. It wasn't like you made a conscious choice to scream at your kids, right? And we can look at our kids' behavior the same way. They're not making that conscious choice to huck that candy bar or to like kick their brother. I mean, a lot of times, a lot of those behaviors that we get so frustrated with are probably these body motivated behaviors. I imagine that's what you're seeing.
Absolutely. And I love what you said. It applies to us just as much as it applies to our children. It's a human thing. It's not just a child thing. And I think once we realize, like I have a story in the book, once we realize it's all of us, that we can be more gentle with ourselves and more self-compassionate. In the book, I had a story of I was just on my wit's end, long day, picking up children at the line, and one of my three didn't want to get in the car, and I broke. I just picked her up very roughly, kind of threw her in the car, and I screamed, and I'll never forget the look on the face of a mom that I knew. She heard the scream and she looked at me with horror. And oh my gosh, can you imagine that? I was thinking, I am the world's worst person, and nonetheless, I'm a therapist, so I should just I should just pack it in and forget this whole mothering thing. But I'm sure we can all kind of think about times where we've lost it, and that was a good example. In the words of Dr. Barrett, my body budget was gone. I left it all on the therapy couch. I left it all at work. I had nothing left, and it was up to me to develop awareness and self-compassion, and this awareness of my physical needs, actually, because I think as moms, we often, and possibly dads too, of course, like we often as parents are stretched and we don't know it because our culture tells us that our brain and body are not connected.
Yeah.
We are reinforced for ignoring our body signals, by working long hours and production, having a lot of production. So it's it just takes the load off of us. I think it gives us more compassion for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to understand that, yeah, we all have this nervous system. We got to deal with it, and we've got to, we've got to take care of ourselves. Or, yeah, I've been there. I remember like crying at arriving at the school, giving this amazing, wonderful teacher my child, and then bursting into tears because of pure relief.
I love that.
Thank you. And I walk away now.
Oh my gosh, the
But
relief.
I just want to like reiterate. So Mona's talking about the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett, and Lisa says that talks about how our brain is wired, our whole body, right, it's wired for survival, and that our brain is looking at our body's budget of energy, of resources, of like nutritious food, right? Like glucose and salts, whatever it translates into, like in the chemistry of it, right? And saying, you need resources here, you need resources here. And when we run out, then as we know, we are then useless for our children. And that's really where that piece about self-care is actually your responsibility comes in.
Yeah. In her words, that's when you need a deposit into your body budget or your child's body budget. You don't need another withdrawal. And so that realizing when we need a deposit as a parent, I think is transformative, because I think it helps us not land in those scary places that we don't want to land in. And it also gives us more of an understanding of children's behaviors. And like we said, I think our culture is still struggling with this idea of how much discipline or non-discipline do you give? And that's the wrong question. To me, the question is this evidence of a depleted body budget and the child in need of support?
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that question. And I'd love to talk about a little bit about in the very beginning, you mentioned the top down approaches that are judgmental and shaming of parents and kids. Like you talked about timeouts and ignoring are a lot of times not what kids need. Um, what, what are some of the approaches that maybe um, leftover approaches from the past that are still continue to be in use that aren't supportive of understanding our kids? What are the things that we want to kind of watch out for that may be things that other parenting coaches or books are recommending to us, or even the schools may be recommending to us?
Yeah. Well, I think here's one that just the first one that comes to mind, because I think it's very prevalent, and it's almost a rule in the education system, it seems to me, and that is that you should ignore inappropriate behaviors, or ignore behaviors that you are deeming as non-compliant, or whatever, non-preferred, I should say, in our education system. Like, do you ignore a quote unquote bad behavior? And the new paradigm in thinking about that is what kind of behavior is this? And what I've witnessed over and over again in the school system is that those behaviors that are ignored are typically stress behaviors. Those are when children are either a depleted body budget, or their nervous system is detecting threat, which is subconscious. There's something happening either in the sounds, in the movement in the room, or something inside their body that puts them onto the sympathetic fight or flight pathway. And then what an individual in that state needs is social engagement, is compassion, is witnessing, an adult saying, "Oh, sweetheart, this is a situation. Let's see how we can help you." And over and over again in our education system, even in our preschool, and even in things like Head Start, teachers are taught in their training to ignore such behaviors because they are there for getting quote unquote negative attention. And I'm dismantling that whole notion. I don't think there is such a thing as getting negative attention. Children want to please. As Ross Greene says, children do well when they can. And I truly believe that. So there's an example, ignoring behaviors is not, is really something I don't recommend, because we want to pay attention to what's underlying the behavior. Remember, behaviors are the tip of the iceberg.
So I can imagine a parent listening to this and saying, well, my son, goes and picks on his little sister when I'm giving child number 3 some attention, right? And so he's wanting me to give attention to this through this behavior. How should I respond then? Because I don't want to reinforce it, right? We don't want to reinforce those behaviors.
Yeah, great question, and great thinking based on how we traditionally view behaviors. So a great question, and who can't relate to that? Because things happen, especially when you add multiples and there's not just one child but another one, right? It's sibling rivalry is it's so expected, and it's really hard as well. So the mind shift would be, so you see child number, you're with a baby, maybe nursing or just taking care of your youngest, and then you see child number 2 bugging child number 3. And in your mind, you could think, oh my gosh, there they go again. I'm just going to ignore this because he's trying to get my attention. Or you can say, his little body is starting to feel antsy. I see the biomarkers. He's starting to move. His eyes don't look soft. His body, it looks tense. He's darting around the room, looking at me and then looking away from me. I think he's starting to get into a stress response. So what can I do right now? What you can do in that moment is, you don't change what you're doing. The baby needs you, of course, but you can be 2 places at once by by witnessing what you see. Oh, sweetheart, here I am nursing the baby again, and I see that you're kind of trying to sit on sister's lap and she doesn't want to. All right, buddy. Hey, could you maybe go bring your coloring book and sit by me? I'd love to be
Mm.
close to you. That's just I'm just
Yeah,
making
yeah,
it
yeah,
up.
yeah.
But
Uh-huh.
what I'm saying is you can witness what's motivating. You can guess at what's motivating a child, and we can choose to see it not as a misbehavior, but as a stress behavior. And sibling rivalry, especially after you get a new baby in the house, or if you've got, multiple children, is very common. And of course, we set family values and rules about what is allowed between siblings and what's not part of how our family does things, and what's behaviors are allowed or not allowed. But you can set nice, beautiful boundaries and be empathic for the underlying motivation at the same time.
I love that. It's that whole, that what you're saying is like this child is having a moment of like, I need to be seen and heard. I'm feeling right. Like the needs are like, see me, hear me. And you're saying, yeah, stay there, nurse the baby or whatever it is. And you can see and hear the other child. I mean, and that it's like kind of like it's like name it to tame it, right? We're acknowledging what's the reality right now. So rather than ignoring, we're acknowledging, oh my goodness, I'm here with the baby. Oh my goodness, you're over there. You look like you got ants in your pants, buddy. You know,
Yes,
and we can start to just and all of this like it always comes back to that like ability to like be aware, to be alert, right? To be able to be present. It's interesting.
exactly. And since you know Lisa, I'll share with you her application to that. What's happening when that little guy is darting over, looking at you, and starting to bug his sister or their sister, is that his brain is predicting that you are not available. So the brain is
Mhm.
constantly predicting based on current information and past experiences.
Yeah.
And this is beyond, not consciously, this is happening lightning seconds. So actually, that brain's prediction is causing his body to move. It's causing the body to have this basic negative affect or feeling. And the movement is there to help him feel better. So
Hmm.
you're absolutely right. If we can witness it with this deeper understanding of, this is interesting, this is what's going on, and throw away our notions of negative attention and you need to clamp down harder and you're not being hard enough on your children. All of these things are still being told to parents by well-meaning family members or pediatricians. I see it all the time in my practice.
Hmm.
So
All
there's a lot of
right.
confusion out there.
So, dear listener, watch out for the advice to ignore your kid. I would, of course, I know, but I just want to say out loud that, of course, it includes timeout kind of thing. This is, I mean, I know this is ineffective, but maybe you could tell us why this is ineffective from that body brain based position.
From a body brain based position, timeouts are generally given to children with the most egregious behaviors, egregious meaning activated. And that would be those red pathway behaviors that I call them, like, fight or flight behaviors are indications that the child needs a deposit and not a withdrawal. The worst
Mhm.
withdrawal you can do to a human is take away you, is take away your attention. And so actually, if you give a child a timeout when they are in that state, their bodies are going to feel worse. And it actually might begin to teach them. And, let me just say, first of all, no blame, no shame. I
Mhm.
doled out timeouts when my children were young because I was trained that they were the best thing ever. So no
Mhm.
blame, no shame. Okay. This is like,
Mhm.
we have to just embrace ourselves. But just let me
Thank
say,
you.
from a neurodevelopmental perspective, if you give a child a timeout when they're highly activated, their biomarkers are going to get more agitated and they may learn that they have to stuff their feelings or
Mhm.
pretend to be okay when they're actually not okay inside in order to get our attention again. And we
Wow.
really
Yeah.
want to raise children who don't have to stuff their feelings and who can talk to us and be vulnerable with us. So I'd say that is when a timeout is not a good idea. Now, let me just distinguish.
Mhm.
If a child has done something that you feel they should think about, if again,
Mhm.
if it was a motivated behavior, if maybe they
Mm.
lied or hurt someone's feelings, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, sweetheart, maybe it'd be a good idea for you to go think about that for a little while. Maybe you want to take a walk or just to be with yourself. So I
Mhm.
think that might not
Mm.
be a timeout, but I really think that that it's okay to let children be with themselves and think about stuff, but that's completely different than giving them a timeout for a stress behavior. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I really appreciate that delineation. And you talk about that. Like this is about in your book, like how this is about being aware of like individual differences with children. It's not about like there's a strategy that we follow all the time, like this like consistent quote unquote parenting strategy, but you're talking about awareness, bringing like really mindfulness, right? This mindsets of kindness and curiosity to what's really happening. This is interesting. So you raise kids like as you're learning all this, as you're doing all this clinical practice. How did this change the way you were parenting your own kids?
Oh my goodness. Like night and day. I had a well-meaning pediatrician scare the daylights out of me on one of my children. And she's saying, I think she has this diagnosis. The DSM is this Bible of psychiatry. And of course, I knew exactly what she was saying. It's like in that model, it's like, oh, your child may have this. I panicked and it was horrible. And the stress that you go through as a parent when you hear something from a professional about your child is so enormous. So um, I'll never forget. I'll just tell you, Hunter, I'll never forget. I was sitting in a study session at a colleague's house, and we were talking about truly the difference between top-down and body-up behaviors. And it flashed in my head that this was my daughter.
Mm,
Everything that I was worried about, that I told her pediatrician about, who gave her a label,
mm,
was not a psychiatric problem. It was her body's reaction to the world. Her detection of safety and threat in the world was different than mine. She was
wow.
highly wired to detect things that I couldn't even hear or feel. And I remember just having tears running down my face. That was a seminal moment when I realized, oh my goodness, this is going to help my mothering, and this is going to help my patients. And that was over 2 decades ago.
Wow. Well, that's cool. So what changed? What did you do differently?
Well, I stopped giving timeouts. I think the internal change, the context, the
Mhm.
story I told myself changed.
Yeah.
Before, I'd be like, when my children were doing something, the first thing I think is, can the neighbors hear the screaming? Are they going to think, because one of mine was a shrieker. I'm like, oh my gosh, what are the neighbors going to think? And am I doing the right thing? Are my children polite and respectful? I was so concerned about, am I doing this right? And then what shifted was my lens. Then, like, for example, when one of my children refused to go to Disneyland, I was like, oh, this isn't just someone who's spoiled and doesn't want to go to Disneyland. There's a real reason here. It is completely overwhelming her nervous system.
Mhm.
And so it led me to more compassion naturally. And years after that, I met someone who's like one of my heroes, Kristen Neff, and I went to long retreats with her near the Big Sur in the California coast, and realized how beautifully self-compassion fits, because it
Mm.
allows us to see our children through a new lens. The science helps me know the mechanics behind what's going on, but the end result is more grounded relationships for life. And my children are my greatest teachers, and I'm so grateful to have the relationships that I have with my children now, because of the lens shift, I think, of less worry, less freaking out, less blame, and not thinking that it was my discipline or not being consistent enough. It wasn't that.
It was their body. It was their needs,
It was
their
their
nurses.
individual differences. That's right. If
Yeah.
every one of our children has these unique differences, and this is, oh my gosh, it's the concept of interoception that I talk about in the book, is how our bodies are constantly sending feedback to our brain about what we're experiencing, like 24/7. It's huge. That's going to help parents if they have confusing behaviors in their children. This idea of interoception, of this body up feedback, is going to break things open. I hope, if I have anything to do with it.
Well, for interoception, right, is this, as far as I know it, is this sense of how you're sensing the inside of your body, which is kind of interesting, right? Because most of our senses are trained to the outside of our body, right, for survival. So we don't have a lot of like, for instance, I really can't feel my kidneys, whatever, right?
Right. And you would want to.
I would want to, right? But we can sense inside our body, right? We can sense our muscles tight, maybe in our shoulders or our jaw. We can sense muscles tightening and blood flow and things like that. But it's not something that we are often feeling. And so I know from a mindfulness perspective that this sense of interoception, mindfulness really builds this sense of like being able to have a greater sense of your body and what's happening, what is the information your body is giving you. How, for the parent who's listening, maybe this is the first time they've listened to a podcast on parenting, they're like, but Mona, what the heck are you talking about? How is this going to help me parent my kids?
Yeah.
How would you answer that question?
Yeah, thank you for bringing it to the practical, because that's what matters. Okay, the awareness of our body sensations is actually called interoceptive awareness. Interoception is largely subconscious. So like you said, you don't feel your liver and your kidneys and your stomach. If you all of those things, we don't actually feel that, thank goodness. That would be really freaky. But what we can feel is things like a tummy clenching, heart rate beating fast, sweaty palms, or basic feelings like, I feel yucky inside right now, mommy, or I feel good or bad. Those are called basic affects or feelings, basic feelings inside of our body. What research is showing, what neuroscience is showing, is that these basic feelings are actually the foundation for eventually understanding emotional literacy. Labeling your feelings appears to start with this awareness of your body. And I know some adults and many children who can't label a feeling, and there's so much compassion for that. But in the later parts of the book, I talk to parents about how we can start to, the best thing we can do to help our children eventually develop emotional literacy. That is the ability to talk about what's going on in terms of their feelings and their states, rather than acting it out, is to slow down with them, is to notice ourselves, is to help them notice their basic feelings. And it can be as simple as, you're driving in the car and a siren goes off and one of your children gets scared and covers their ears. And you can say, oh my goodness, where did you feel that in your body? And that's the start. That's the start, is this awareness that we can have these sensations and make sense of them. One day it'll help us organize our emotional life.
Yes. Oh God, we could just, it's like we're coming up against our time, but I'm like, yes, and then there's so much from there, right? Like as we do that, right? And we feel these things, and then we become, we can raise a generation who aren't afraid of feeling these sensations in our bodies, right? Whereas like the past generations, we generally push it down or avoid it, or any discomfort in the body, we kind of run away from mentally and physically. And so then we don't have this awareness, and we don't have an ability to tolerate discomfort. And that's the ability to tolerate discomfort and to understand that this is a sensation in my body and it's not, I'm okay. It's just a sensation in my body, is enormously freeing and helpful in life.
It's enormously freeing. And you would not believe the research that's coming out that I talk about in Brain Body Parenting is that they are discovering that children and adults with better awareness of their sensations are have better levels of self-regulation, meaning I can control my emotions and behaviors. I'm more in touch with myself. I'm healthier. So everything we know about mindfulness, all those thousands of studies about the health benefits of mindfulness apply. And we can even take it further to this, a gentle awareness of our bodies, and really help our children understand that when they have a behavior, there's likely a sensation or emotion or a sensation or feeling attached to that one day they might be able to talk about as an emotion. But if we ignore it or seclude them when they are feeling that way, it gives them the message that those aren't as important as compliance. And so that's my heart's desire, is that parents will understand the beauty of the science coming out in our brain and our body, and the wisdom of compassionate awareness.
Yay. Oh my goodness. I love this. I love talking to you so much about this, Mona. I'm sure we could get together and like spout off for 3 hours about this. It's amazing.
I know, I could talk to you all day.
Mona's book is, again, Brain Body Parenting: How to Stop Managing Behavior and Start Raising Joyful, Resilient Kids. You can find it anywhere books are sold. I want to ask you, if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Oh, my website is monadelahooke.com. And
Hook with an E, like I imagine Captain Hook spells it.
Oh yeah, not Captain Hook. Yeah, it's
Hook with an E.
Delahooke with an E at the end. And Dr. Mona Delahooke on Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Yeah, Mona Delahooke PhD or Dr. Mona Delahooke. So I'm on social too. And I love connecting with parents, and I love talking to people like you who truly, you're helping parents integrate the mind and the body. It's beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I also wanted to ask like one is there anything that, we miss for the parent who's saying, oh my goodness, I was top down, I was ignoring these quote unquote bad behaviors, and you're opening my eyes. I'm starting to see this, that, oh my God, a lot of these behaviors I thought were bad, or maybe these are actually body motivated behaviors. How do they start to integrate this into their lives and into their parenting?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that. And this is very, very important. Because I know the feeling of learning information and thinking, oh my gosh, I did it wrong. I did something wrong. Did I harm my children? So I would like to say to any parent who might be hearing this is thinking, oh no, I didn't really do that. Or have I harmed them? Please no. The answer to that is no. You did the best you could with the information you had, and children are resilient. The most powerful news from neuroscience is that our brains are always updating their predictions. So as parents, the window never closes to help our child's brain predict safety, predict different things from the world and from us. And we're wired that way. We're not wired to be perfect parents. Humanity would have not survived if that was the case. So I'd say the most important message is one of self-compassion, gentleness on yourself, and realizing that it's not a matter of getting it right or getting it wrong. It's an ongoing process Hope never leaves, and your children know you love them. So I hope people leave this, listening to this, with hope and warmth and gentleness to yourself, and not fear.
Yes. Amen. Yes. We are going to be imperfect no matter what our thoughts and strategies. So it's okay. It's okay if you're making, I love that message. I really, really appreciate that, Mona. Thank you so much. I really appreciate, I think it's wonderful that you took the time to write the books that you've written, and to help start to shift this in the psychological community, start to shift us into being in our bodies. I feel really grateful for the work that you've done, and I'm really grateful you took time to come and join us here on the podcast. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much for having me. It was really, really wonderful to talk to you.
Catch new episodes of the Mindful Mama podcast and other free resources, including the Mindful Mom Guide at mindfulmamamentor.com. You can listen to every back catalog episode, including interviews with Dr. Dan Siegel, Ianla Van Zandt, Sharon Salzberg, and get meditations, join our private Facebook group, and more. Go to mindfulmamamentor.com now. I'll see you there.